Hello everybody. Just a couple of days ago, the OneRing.net leaked the synopsis for Amazon's series, which is based in Middle-earth. So I'm going to have it up on the screen for you, and I'm going to give my take as a Lord of the Rings lore lover, enthusiast, what I'd like to see, what I think is probably going to happen, and so forth. So onwards and upwards. So let's really quickly talk about the costs for this series. Amazon bought the rights for $250 million, and there is talk of a total budget of $1 billion plus for 5 seasons, each of 8 to 10 episodes each. And, in comparison, Game of Thrones with its 73 episodes, 8 seasons, had a budget of $1.5 billion. So that's, it's a very sizable project, and you can expect a lot of stuff just because of that. So let us begin. Amazon's forthcoming series brings to screens for the very first time the heroic legends of the fabled Second Age of Middle-earth history. Now, this is one of very few things that we definitely did know that it was going to be in the Second Age, because the Lord of the Rings on Prime Twitter account, like last year, they were already tweeting out the map of Middle-earth and kind of showing stages of it, and in the end they showed Numenor on there as well. And Numenor was only around in the Second Age, so that's a given. It follows as such. This epic drama is set thousands of years before the events of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and will take viewers back to an era in which great powers were forged, kingdoms rose to glory and fell to ruin. Now, for comparison's sake, The Hobbit was in 2941 of the Third Age, and The Lord of the Rings, the War of the Ring, that was in 3018 to 1319 of the Third Age. And the Second Age then, by, quick maths, 3,000 years prior, and the Second Age as well, by the way, ran, 3,441 years itself, so it was actually longer than the Third Age, so there's a lot of time to fill there, certainly. Amazon's rights then for the $250 million, by the way, yes, they don't have the rights to the Silmarillion, but when people say the Silmarillion, they often mean the Silmarillion, which is kind of the bulk of the book, which is titled as the Silmarillion. Now, bear with me, it also has the Akalabeth, which tells of the downfall of Numenor in the Second Age, and then it also has of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. These are kind of like add-ons to the book. Now, that stuff, they can obviously tell the story of that. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense why they would have had, the map of Middle-earth in the Second Age. Like, what else are they going to base it on? And there's certainly some scope there to come up with some new lore, and they have actually been given the go-ahead for that. Now, when it says great powers, does that mean individuals? Probably not. The reason why I say that is because it also says forged, and this is very, very similar to, the Rings of Power. And as I already said, of the Third Age and the Rings of Power, that is stuff that they are allowed to cover, and I think that is a prime candidate for one of the series. Like, certainly of the creation of the Rings of Power, and perhaps, you'll have Sauron as Annatar, the giver of gifts, in his fairer form, because of course, if you are a fan of the films, you know Sauron just in his plate mail or in his great armour, and he was once upon a time, he looked quite nice. He had a fair form. He didn't always look so horrific. And then, of course, you could also then have Celebrimbor, the grandson of Fëanor, the great crafter of the Silmarils. And, he's just an eager smith. But what about then, kingdoms rose to glory and fell to ruin? Now, there's an obvious candidate. When I mentioned the Akalabeth, you could be talking about Numenor. And, I'll get onto that a little bit later. But if I just follow the story of Celebrimbor, and if they do follow of the Rings of Power, or the creation of, Eregion or Ost-in-Ithil, that wasn't really a kingdom, but, Celebrimbor was certainly the ruler of that realm, and, that definitely did rise from the Second Age 750 until its, ruin by Sauron in the 17th century. So I think there could be a really good bit there about the growth of the Gwaith y Myrddin, the Jewelsmiths Guild, and there's going to be all kinds of little bits of magic and things like that. And of course, where it says cover all the world in darkness, you know, and greatest villain penned by Tolkien. Well, I mean, you could say that's Morgoth, but to be honest, Sauron did a lot more, and Tolkien as well. You know, he wrote mostly about Sauron, so I think it's fair to say that he is going to be the main antagonist there. Moving on then, beginning in a time of relative peace, the series follows an ensemble cast of characters both familiar and new as they confront the long-feared re-emergence of evil to Middle-earth. Now, familiar to who exactly? Is this familiar to people that have seen the films or read the books? Now, I mean, it's a similar answer really to both. Now, if you're familiar to the films, the only characters probably that you're gonna see are Galadriel, because she was obviously around, being an elf. Now, Galadriel, she was in Lindon up until the 750th year, where she relocated to Eregion. That again is where Celebrimbor set up his realm in Osternathil and things like that. Before she would then go, between the years 1350 to 1400, she'd go to LOTRonPrime. So she's been there ever since then, up until, you know, the Lord of the Rings. Now, during that time, she of course moves through Khazad-dûm. So there's certainly, you know, perhaps they're going to have some kind of storyline there with the dwarves. Perhaps there was obviously some animosity, certainly at this time in particular, between the Sindarin elves and those elves that lived in Doriath in the First Age and the dwarves. Now, aside from that, you might have Glorfindel make an appearance, but he'd be much later on because he only reappears in Middle-earth in 1600 of the Second Age. Now that could be very interesting because of course he came from Aman, the Undying Lands from Valinor, because he actually died in the First Age and was brought back. Similar to how the Istari came, or the wizards, they would come in the Third Age, however. Now, then of course, then you'd also have Elrond. He was in Lindon, and he was like the herald of Gil-galad. He's not well, he is a major character, but he's kind of just like a general for the High King at the time, and he would become the general of the reinforcement army from Lindon that would go and aid Celebrimbor later on, should they add in the War of Sauron and the elves. And of course then he would then found Rivendell, which again, I think that would be really cool. Like, how great would it be just to see Rivendell before it was, like, inhabited? Like, I'm sure it would have been pretty great. And then, of course, there were no dwarves, no men, no Istari, no Hobbit to speak of because, well, they're not alive, so it would be very difficult to kind of feature them in the Second Age. I mean, I say that with a great... Obviously, the wizards are alive, they're just in Aman, they haven't come over yet. But then finally... You know, familiar is quite a loose term. You might be familiar with the kings of Númenor at the time, but you don't really know them. But perhaps that's what they could mean. There could be Elros, the brother of Elrond. You know, we're very familiar with him, and he, as the first king of Númenor, certainly lived a very long life. I think he was like 500 and something years old before he passed away. So he could also be featured. And then on to the next part that I want to look at, from the darkest depths of the Misty Mountains. Okay, so Misty Mountains, again, as I said previously, you could have some dwarves in there, particularly dwarves of Khazad-dûm. That's mainly what I'm gonna assume is gonna happen, particularly when it says darkest depths. Now, does that mean orcs? Orcs are obviously abound, but... Are they then going to look at perhaps the foul creatures? Do you remember in the Fellowship of the Ring, you had the Watcher at the gate, on the West Gate, when the Fellowship were passing through? That is one of these foul creatures that, you know, were said to be kind of living beneath Khazad-dûm. So if you also recall from the films when you've got Gandalf and the Balrog kind of plunging down into that great underwater or underground lake, perhaps there's greater terrors down there that we could end up seeing or hearing about? Because if there are orcs about, perhaps they're going to give them some kind of dialogue. Entirely possible. Think back to Cirith Ungol. You did have some orcs having some back and forth there. And whereas I don't think the Balrog is going to make an appearance, because in the lore that only appears, what, in 1980 of the Third Age, so very deep into the Third Age, there could be some foreshadowing, because of course the orcs, they feared the Balrog pretty much just as much as anyone else did. It owed no allegiance to Sauron, it was to Melkor that it did so. So the orcs are going to fear it, and perhaps they're going to kind of talk about a certain area down in the deeps of the mountain that they don't want to go near, and that's going to foreshadow the Lord of the Rings somewhat. And then the majestic forests of the elf capital of Lindon. Okay, so that is where we're probably going to see some of that like majesty of the elves that I was kind of talking about that I'd want to see with the formation of Rivendell. Now, Lindon, we don't really see that much of in the Lord of the Rings. We don't know too much about it, but I'm sure as the elf capital of the High King of the Noldor, is going to be amazing. Expect amazing scenery, unless they kind of really screw it up with CGI again or something like that. Then, with the destruction of the forest that could occur in the war with Sauron, you know, you'd see a bleak transformation coming from this really nice city of Mithlond, and then going out into, you know, like Enid Wyeth, where it's all been it's completely desolate. And that's a possibility. Now then, it does also mention Numenor there, the breathtaking island kingdom. Now, I did also mention previously about the rise and fall of kingdoms, and I'll get onto that in just a moment, but I would expect, you know, this to be the rising kingdom. Like, this is, like, it's raised out of the sea, and it is blessed by the Valar. They come over, and like some of the Maiar come over and bless it, and like it's gonna be absolutely amazing. Perhaps with Elros being a familiar character, perhaps they're gonna show the voyage from the ruins of Beleriand at the start of the Second Age, in Second Age 32, as they kind of come to Numenor and like seek all this wonder. Like, remember, these are men coming from a life of war and destruction following the War of Wrath, and then they come into this land of plenty. They'd follow on into the year 600, where they'd colonize Middle-earth, kind of start building a couple of settlements, Londair or Vignalonde as it's known at the time, and in the year 750 then, you have the Guild of Venturers, which is founded by Aldarion. And Aldarion is known as a great mariner, and he would actually become the king. And when it also says furthest reaches of the map is explored, I reckon that is probably going to tie into that. So that also being in the year 750, and with everything else I've already kind of looked into, it really leads into, are they going to follow Aldarion with his like Guild of Venturers going across the map? They sail entirely around all of Middle-earth. You're going to see a lot of different landscapes there that we have not seen in The Lord of the Rings. And then at the same time, you have the formation of Eregion. So it's kind of like the way those two kind of form up, I think that could definitely be a possibility. Now, definitely expect some kind of struggle there, because there is a known shadow, and Gil-galad actually warns the Númenórean kings that, you know, there is a shadow in the east, be ready when the time comes. And then these kingdoms and characters will carve out legacies that live on long after they are gone. Now, Aldarion and Erendis is a well-known story, and that was brought over by Elendil the Tall to Middle-earth following the fall of Númenor. So that is a legacy, and that is a part of their history that they are able to hold on to. And I think that could definitely be something brought into the series. So there we go. I think I've pretty much gone through everything that I wanted to there. Sorry for waffling on. There is definitely more scope that they could do for these series. So to say that this is the only thing that's going to happen is completely false. I don't know. This is just me guessing and trying to put everything together in a logical way. Now, filming is obviously already underway, and you can expect this to come out in, well, previously they did say December 2021. However, with everything going on with Corona, that may have been pushed back a little bit. But they are actually now filming seasons 1 and 2 back to back. Those two seasons have been fully commissioned. Obviously, if they don't do very well, then season 3, 4, and 5 will just get scrapped, and you know, Amazon's definitely got the money for that. But I definitely want to follow this along, so if you have any thoughts, drop them down in the comments. And yeah, I'm going with Gandalf. Good day. It is muddy. It is very, very muddy, and it is also raining, so my little bit of paper's getting a bit sodden.